So there is actually a thief in your building, and he is not stealing your inventory. He is not hacking your servers. He is not embezzling your funds. And in fact, you actually invited him in and you actually pay him, and you probably had lunch with him today. So that one thing that is actually stealing is your valuation. He's stealing your speed. He's stealing the very lifeblood of your organization. And you may think that you have a marketing problem, or you have a sales problem, or maybe you think you have a talent retention problem. But you don't, because all of these are just symptoms, and they are just like bruises of um, the damage that this thief has caused or has done. So, and I'm here to actually tell you that you actually have a clarity problem, and right now it is acting as a tax. It is acting as a tax, and it is a hidden, non-discretionary tax that is levied on every single decision that you make, on every dollar that you spend, on every word that you speak, especially when you do marketing. And we at Mohgix and even the Mohgix Institute, we call it the clarity tax, right? And unlike the government, this tax doesn't wait for April. It doesn't wait for the next fiscal year, right? This particular tax actually collects every day, right? It collects when your strategy fails to execute. It collects when your best people actually quit, like when your A players actually quit from your company, right? It collects when your stock price drops because the market doesn't understand who you are, right? And if you do not understand who I am, or the message I'm trying to send, or the problem we are trying to solve, we are literally paying the clarity tax. Okay, so you are losing money because you are actually confusing people, and it is that simple. And today we are actually going to like calculate exactly how much it is costing you to be misunderstood. Now, let's stop pretending this is actually like a like a simple stuff or like a soft stuff, because so many people think this clarity problem is a simple thing, like, oh, I mean, we can just fix it with a lot more money. So let us stop pretending that this is like a soft problem. It is not a soft problem, right? And we need to stop pretending that clarity is just a pretty slides or a catchy slogan, right? And I need you to understand that this is the lie that the industry told you or has sold to you so that you keep buying hours, like you keep buying their billable hours, right? And you see this gap, the gap that is between the distance that is between the strategy that is in your head and the execution in the market. This is not just a communication gap, it is actually like a liability. The gap, the strategy that you have in your mind and the execution, that how you want to execute that strategy in the market, the gap between that is a liability. And our institute, the Mohgix Institute of Cinematic Strategy, has actually codified this. And honestly speaking, we don't look at confusion as an annoyance. We look at it as an economic disease. And to cure it, we have to go back to 1970. Now, in 1970, there is a man named George Akerlof. If you're an economist, you know George Akerlof. And he literally won a Nobel Prize for a paper called The Market of Lemons. Now, he wasn't talking about fruits. He was talking about used cars, right? And Akerlof actually described a nightmare scenario, which in quotes, it's called asymmetric information. Now, this is a fancy word that economists use to say that the seller actually knows that the car is trash, but the buyer does not, right? So when the seller knows much more information than when the seller knows much more information than the buyer, then that is asymmetrical information, right? And because the buyer cannot tell the difference between a peach, now the peach now in this case is a great car, and a lemon. A lemon now is a terrible car. So because the buyer cannot tell the difference between a peach and a lemon, which is a great car and a terrible car, because back then there were no access to like a lot of information to understand which car is it. I think even today it still happens, right? So they actually get scared because the buyer cannot tell the difference between a great car and a terrible car. So they get scared. And what the buyer does is that they refuse to pay premium prices and they hedge their bets because they offer a low average price. And what happens? When that happens is that the honest sellers, right, the ones with the pitches, the sellers that actually have the best cars, that actually knows that their car at the best, right, they can't afford to sell at that low price. So they actually leave, right? And when they exit the market, who is left? Okay, like when the pitches exit the market, who is left? Only the lemons remain, only the terrible cars remain, right? And then the market collapses. The bad drives out the good. So this is exactly what has happened to my industry, what has happened to the industry that you are currently in, the consulting industry, right? And we call it the strategic void because you are literally swimming in a sea of lemons. Consultants, agencies, advisors, they all profit from this asymmetry because they have a lot more information than you do, and you don't have, you don't really know which is the best. And then when you hear someone tell you to pay a premium price, you get scared and then you go pay an average price and then you regret it, right? So they actually know that if they confuse you enough, and I mean the lemons, the consultants, the agencies, the advisors that are in the market, that are flooding the market right now, when they confuse you enough, you will keep paying them to manage the complexity, because I mean it is complex for them to be able to help you um, 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 gain clarity, execute on your strategy. It is a complex thing, right? That is why a lot of founders, they go and then they pay $500,000 for a 100-page strategy deck from brands like, from consulting firms like McKinsey, for example. And you come back and then these decks they are logical. However, because there are a lot of them, they know you cannot study that plan and then execute it. They know. So, but these people get paid because they know that if they can confuse you, the more they can confuse you, the more you pay them. Now, in all honesty, they're not selling you solutions. They are not selling you solutions. They are only selling you confusion, right? And the price that you actually pay for that confusion is what we call the clarity tax. Now, in this market of lemons, they sell you confusion. They do not sell you solutions. They sell you what seems like solution, but it does not solve the problem. It does not eliminate the problem, right? So, and the price that you pay for that confusion is what we call the clarity tax, right? And honestly, it is an economic extortion, right? You are paying protection money to the very people who are causing the problem. Yes, you are paying protection money to the very people who are causing the problem. And you may think that you are paying for strategy and you are actually paying for a risk transfer document. Yes, because that is what it is. You are paying for a 100-page plan that exists solely to say, don't blame us when it fails. Because when it fails, we'll look at the damage when it fails, but they're actually transferring the risk and telling you that don't blame us when it fails because we don't know how to solve your problem. Honestly speaking, but because they went to Ivy League schools, Harvard, and the rest of them, and then they speak some very fluent English to you, and then it sounds logical, right? And you feel like, oh, this is actually going to solve my problem, but it is not going to solve your problem, right? It is going to only give you more confusion, only going to make you more confused, and then you continue to pay them more money. And when the strategy actually fails, or when this particular 100-page plan actually fails, what is the damage? Now, for us to be able to audit, we at the institutes we have actually audited the damage, and we call this the Ogilvy math. We decided to name this damage. We call it the Ogilvy math, right? Because it is the quantifiable proof of where this tax is actually hitting you, right? And it hits 4 specific theaters of war. Yes, it is war, because strategy is about war. It's like war. In fact, strategy is war, right? And the first damage is actually the valuation drag, which is the strategy tax. Now, Harvard Business Review, Kaplan, and Norton, the data is actually consistent from these particular sources, right? They keep on telling us that 90% of well-formulated strategies fail to execute. 90% of well-formulated strategies fail to execute. Can you imagine that? Well-formulated strategies from Harvard, not from Harvard, 90% well-formulated strategies from McKinsey, from BCG, from all these plans, they fail to execute, right? Or from boutique firms, they fail to execute. And these are real research, real data from verifiable sources, right? And I need you to think about that. If you're a founder, if you're a C-suite, if you're a leader, if you're a diplomat, and you pay millions for the strategy, you know how much it costs you to pay to get a good strategy. You know how much it costs. You had to invest. Let's not make it a cost right now. You had to invest, because it is an investment when you pay for someone to help you think, to help you formulate a strategy, right? But you pay millions, you pay millions, right, for strategy. You fly to the offsite, and then you create the binder, and then 9 times out of 10, it dies in this room. It dies in your drawer, and it just collects dust, right? And why? Because nobody understood these well-formulated strategies, because it was all academic, it was all English, right? It was theoretical, it was a lemon, it was a terrible car, right? It wasn't designed to be executed, it was only designed to be built. And I need you to watch my video on where I spoke about why you should not pay a strategist, why we reject the billable hour, right? And now, like we said, nobody understood it. It was all it's all academic. It's all theoretical, right? Then it ends up becoming just wasted fees. Now, this is actually opportunity cost. This is what is known as opportunity cost, because if you are paying, or if you are $100 million company, right, your valuation is below or above $100 million, and your strategy actually fails to execute. Honestly speaking, you didn't just lose the consultant fee, you actually lost the $50 million in growth that strategy was supposed to deliver. Because that strategy that you paid, right? If you paid millions if your company is $100 million valuation and you paid millions to get a strategy, now that is a tax on your future valuation. So in the second theater is the payroll tax. Now this is the one that actually hurts the most, because it is personal. Now data from Gallup, which they actually released an article, and then about the cost of disengagement, right? The cost of showing up but mentally checking out. And globally, it is actually $8.8 trillion, like we said, and that is 9% of the entire global GDP. And in the United States alone, this problem actually cost nearly $2 trillion. But let's break it down to your P&L. Now, your A players, the high performance, right? The ones that you cannot afford to lose, they actually hate confusion. They hate the strategic void, that gap where your strategy, between your strategy and your execution, that gap, they hate that confusion that is in between that gap, right? And an A player, right, the high performers in your company, they actually need a mission. And if you give them a 100-page document full of corporate fluff, full of corporate jargon, they don't feel safe. They feel leaderless, right? And when they leave, what does Gallup say? Gallup says it costs you 200% of their annual salary to replace them, right? So that is the payroll tax, because you are paying a premium to actually replace people who left because you could not tell them a clear story about where you are or where you were going, right? So you are literally funding your own attrition. Now, let's look at theater 3, which is the marketing tax, or as we call it, narrative collapse. Now, look at Cracker Barrel, a classic American brand, right? In 2024 and 2024 to 2025, they tried to rebrand. They wanted to be modern, and they wanted to fix a problem that they didn't understand. Keynote, they did not understand. So what they did, I believe what their advisors or what their consultant told them to do was to change the logo, okay? And they tweaked the menu. They literally, by doing that, they literally messed the soul of the brand. And what was the result? A market cap liquidation estimated between $100 million to and $200 million in days. A market cap liquidation estimated between $100 to $200 million in days, not in years, not in months, in days. And why? Because they confused their audience. They signaled lemon when they were a peach, right? They violated the whole or the core expectation of their customer base. So this is why Nielsen reports that 54% of global marketers are planning to cut ad spend in 2025. I mean, this is the end of 2025, and I believe a lot of people have decided to cut ad spend, and then they're beginning to adopt new strategies or better strategies, right? And these people are actually retreating because they are scared, right? Because they know that throwing money at a confused message doesn't buy growth. It just buys a faster public failure. Yes, it buys a faster public failure. So this is what we also call the best kept secret syndrome. And if you are incredible at what you do, but your market is generic, your marketing, is generic, you are paying a tax on every lead that you don't get. You are subsidizing your inferior competitors who happen to tell a clearer story. What does that mean? If you are incredible at what you do, but your marketing is generic, your marketing sounds like every other person, everyone else's, right? You are literally paying a clarity tax. You're literally paying a tax on every lead that you don't get. So every lead that you don't get as a result of making your marketing generic is a tax that you are paying. Okay? And what do you do as a result? What are you doing as a result? You are literally subsidizing your inferior competitors who happen to tell a clearer story. And finally, the bill actually comes due here, which is the Theater 4, which is the sales tax. Now, a research according to Forrester said 86% of B2B purchases stalled during the buying process, not lost to a competitor. It was stalled, frozen. And why? Because the buyer is confused, right? And Gartner found that 77% of B2B buyers find the process highly complex. And here's the killer statistics. Now, 74% of buyer teams demonstrate unhealthy conflict during the decision because they are arguing with each other. So they're literally arguing with each other because they didn't give them a clear enough narrative to agree on. And what happens to your sales rep? They only get 5% of the customer's time during the journey. 5%. So if your story isn't razor sharp, if it isn't cinematic, you cannot win in that 5% window. So you are literally sending your salespeople into a battle with a butter knife. You are taxing their commission checks. You are taxing your revenue. So we've been speaking about the problems and the tax and everything. You're like, Mo, what's really going on? Let's put it simply, how do we stop the bleeding? Because it is literally bleeding revenue from your from your company, from your institution, from your entity, from your organization, right? How do we repeal the tax? Now, we don't fix marketing. We don't optimize sales funnel. No, these are old tactics. These are tactics that no longer work, that are failing drastically in the new market or in the new economy. And like I said, those things are tactical band-aids on a strategic hemorrhage, right? They are tactics that no longer works. Okay? Very, very difficult to work, especially if you are in the game of stakes and your valuation is above 100 million. You cannot afford to be playing like a lemon. You cannot afford to play the game like a lemon. You cannot afford to play the game like a terrible, your product is terrible. No, right? You don't optimize sales funnel. Now, what we do, we install a lens of cinematic strategy, a lens of cinematic clarity, right? So we, cinematic strategists, we treat your strategy not as a document, but as a capital asset. Now, remember George Arkelov that we spoke about, remember the pitches, right? The only way a pitch survives in a market of lemons is by sending what is known as a costly signal. A signal that is so clear, that is so high quality, that a lemon could never fake it. Now, let's take our clients, for example, RORTs. They were actually a pitch, right? They have a massive procurement firm capable of 500 million naira contracts, right? But they actually signaled like a lemon, according to our research, right? They signaled that they have like a small apparel brand, and the gap was actually costing them 100 million naira in lost deals. Now, we didn't just make a video, we architected a mandate. Before we even made a video, we architected a mandate, and we advised them that we're going to build a digital fortress that signaled their true value. So we literally turned their confusion into conviction. Now, this is the Jigs factor. Now, it is the function, or it is the fusion, of C-suite acumen with cinematic language. It is the ability to tell one clear, irrefutable story that actually cuts through the noise like a scalpel. Now, clarity is actually not a task on your to-do list. It is the most valuable asset on your balance sheet. And I wish a lot of people, this metric can get to like a lot of executives that I intend for it to get to, so that they know that clarity is not a task on your to-do list. It is something that needs to be that you need to get very, very clear. You need to be very, very clear on your message, because you cannot afford to be seen as a lemon in the marketplace, right? Clarity is the only legal unfair advantage that is left, that you have left. It is the only legal unfair advantage that you have left. So now I'm going to give you two choices. You can keep paying the tax. You can keep bleeding valuation. You can keep losing talent and stalling deals, right? Or you can keep buying 100-page binders from the lemon consultants who charge you a lot of money, right? Or you can stop. You can decide to stop. And honestly speaking, we don't want your likes. We don't want your subscription. We don't want your validation. Okay? We want to know if you are serious about stopping the leak. We, Mohgix, we want to know if you're serious about stopping it. And if you're ready to identify exactly where you are bleeding, first we need to identify where you are bleeding. First, we need to identify where you are actually bleeding, what is causing the bleeding, right? So if you are ready, we are offering a strategic void diagnostic. And I must say that it is not free and it is not for everyone, right? It is a forensic audit of your clarity tax, right? When we find a leak, we quantify the tax and then we eliminate it. So we solve the problem for you completely. We solve the problem for you completely. This is not a joke, right? We don't name drop. We operate on a private citadel, a doctrine of the private citadel. So we don't name drop. Even though I would have called names of clients that we've worked with, really high-end clients, right? But because of what is at stake. We don't name drop. So we also depend on word of mouth when someone refer us, right? However, I have decided, or we have decided, we at the Institute and our commercial arm have decided that we want to make our council accessible to like the people who actually need our help. It is not free. It is not for everyone. It is actually a forensic audit of your clarity tax. Like I said, when we find the leak, we quantify the tax and then we eliminate it. Now, the tax is mandatory only if you choose to remain confused. Clarity is a choice. Clarity is a choice, right? Now, this whole report that we've spoken about, we've discussed today, was actually synthesized, or is the synthesized foundational quantitative proof of the clarity tax. How we fuse the Akerlof's economic theory and then with the Ogilvy's math of modern business performance, we have actually established that confusion is a measurable liability. And I needed to do further research on our thesis, our research paper, Clarity, which is where we spoke about quantifying the cost of strategic execution, right? Quantifying the cost of confusion in executive strategy. So please check where you read your research papers, and if you're ready to choose clarity and then stop the bleeding, take the strategic void diagnostic, and we help you eliminate the clarity tax.